Welcome to Sermons for Snowbirds. This is Parshat Vayeshev. It's also the week of Hanukkah. We're celebrating Hanukkah all week. I'd like to begin my remarks by looking at a news item that came out of the United Kingdom, that came out of England this past week, and it's about Jacinta Soldana. Jacinta Soldana was the nurse at the hospital where Kate Middleton was a patient. She was the one who took the phone call from the two Australian DJs who were impersonating the Queen and Prince Charles. And she was fooled by them. And of course, this particular phone call was aired on Australian radio, on English radio, and this nurse was thoroughly humiliated. And on Friday, this past week, she took her own life. And this is a tragic tale, which first of all reminds us of the enormous power of speech. You know, as the 34th Psalm tells us, Mi ha'isha chafetz chaim, who desires life? And it reminds us that Nitzor Lashon Chameira Sifatecha Medaber Mirma, that you should watch your tongue from evil and your lips from speaking words of treachery. How you speak, what you say, can make an enormous impact on your life and the life of everyone around you. And this is what the Talmud says, Hachayim ve'amavet biyad halashon. The life and death are in the hands of the tongue. But of course, this is a perennial lesson, but it's not this lesson that I want to extract from this story. I want to note in this story the enormous power of the monarchy. You know, we who live in North America, whether we be Americans or even Canadians, who are technically subjects of the Queen, do not fully appreciate the power of the monarchy, and in particular the power of the monarchy for those who live in a country which has a reigning monarch. And people who live in England, royalty, the monarchy, is something very profound and very powerful. It's a transcendent institution. It's an institution with an enormous amount of grandeur. What drove this sorry soul, what drove this poor woman to death, to suicide, was the fact that she lived in a country that reveres the monarchy. And she could not imagine ever overcoming the humiliation of having taken that prank call and having given away confidential information about the monarchy, about Kate Middleton. And it's a lesson to all of us who really don't understand and appreciate the grandeur of an institution like the monarchy. Because there are many institutions in Judaism that require that same type of awe and respect, something that really goes beyond the ordinary and truly goes beyond the way that we live in the casual 21st century. And it's a powerful lesson because there are so many institutions. Let's take the institution of the temple. You know, as the Bible puts it, both in the 19th and 26th chapter of the book of Vayikra, of the book of Leviticus, that there is a mitzvah of Mora Mikdash, that you have to treat the temple with awe. And as we mentioned, of course, a couple of weeks ago, how in our own synagogues we don't necessarily treat it with any sense of awe, any sense of respect. But this was the type of awe and respect that was generally given to the temple, and in fact that is a mitzvah, that is a positive commandment. You can't sit down in the presence of the temple. One was supposed to walk out backwards if one went to visit the temple, and indeed till this day, if you go to the Kotel, although it's not required at the site of the Kotel, which is not the site of the temple, it's outside of the Har HaBayit. But one goes to the Kotel, you'll see people who will walk away from the Kotel backwards. And this is actually part and parcel of the mitzvah of Mora Mikdash, the mitzvah of treating the temple with awe. And actually Maimonides records that in the actual Temple Mount, when people would leave, they would walk out backwards. Now the idea of an institution that is awesome and transcendent comes with it as well a proper and fitting celebration of its initiation. You know, if you look at the Bible, whether you look at Solomon dedicating his temple, and his temple was created by no less than 150,000 workmen working for 7 years. Or if you look at even the dedication of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle in the desert, which certainly did not take the same type of effort and work. These are large and massive dedication ceremonies. In the temple, you have the 8 days of Miluim, followed by 12 days of the sacrifices of the various Nesiim, the various heads of the tribes. This is for the tabernacle, actually, in the desert. For Solomon's temple, we're told that there was a 14-day celebration, 7 days prior to Sukkot, as well as the 7 days of Sukkot. And as the Talmud tells us, since in the 7 days prior to Sukkot, you have the holiday of Yom Kippur, that year, on Yom Kippur, the Jews ate on Yom Kippur. That's the type of Chanukah, that's the type of dedication ceremonies that were held both for the Mishkan and for the first temple. And even the second temple, we're told in the book of Ezra, that they had quite the party to dedicate the beginnings of the second temple. And I mention all of this because grandeur requires a powerful dedication. It requires a powerful initiation. It requires a powerful commencement. And I mention all of this because I want to note to you that there's only one holiday in the Jewish calendar that actually recalls the dedication of any temple. And the holiday that recalls the dedication of the temple is actually the holiday that we are celebrating this week, which is the holiday of Hanukkah. The holiday of Hanukkah recalls the dedication of the temple, of which the Chashmonayim, some 2,200 years ago, having returned to a ransacked temple, having returned to a temple that is overgrown, as Josephus describes it, come into the temple, and as the Megillat Ta'anit tells us, they stick 7 metal stakes into the ground, and they rededicate the temple by lighting the menorah. That's what they do. And this is the holiday that remains permanently in the Jewish calendar as the holiday of dedication. And if you think about it, it almost would seem on face value that the name Hanukkah, dedication, is actually ironic. I mean, look at the type of dedications that we've had in Jewish history for the various sanctuaries that the Jews have built. The Mishkan, you have 8 days, plus you have another 12 days. The Temple of Solomon, you have 7 days plus 7 days, which includes eating on Yom Kippur. Both of these temples, when they're dedicated, are beautiful sanctuaries. And yet here you have a rather ransacked temple to which the warriors of the Maccabees finally reach. They come in, and maybe they spend the entire week cleaning it up, but they come there, and it's in awful shape. And the one thing they can do to rededicate the temple is place 7 stakes in the ground. And yet this is the holiday of Hanukkah that we continue to celebrate to this day. There's no grandeur over here. There's nothing that seems to be awe-filled or aesthetically overwhelming. It's actually a rather humble time with rather humble initiations. And yet this is what we call Hanukkah. And I think, even though it seems a bit ironic, this is actually the fundamental lesson of Hanukkah. There are Chanukkot, there are dedications that are filled with grandeur and filled with awe and filled with pomp and circumstance. And then there are dedications that are filled with greatness. The dedications of grandeur and pomp and circumstance, like they have in Solomon's time, like they have in Moses' time, are about the actual building. The building is beautiful. Let us come and celebrate the building. But in Hanukkah, something very different is being celebrated. What we are celebrating on Hanukkah is not the grandeur of the building and the beauty of the building, but what we are celebrating on Hanukkah is the greatness of those who are doing the dedication. Hanukkah is not about the grandeur. Hanukkah is not about what we're dedicating. Hanukkah is about who is doing the dedication. And the Maccabees, the Chashmonayim, who have been living in caves, who have been on the run from the Seleucids, and finally managed to vanquish those who are oppressing them and trying to deprive them of their religion. The Maccabees are great. And it is their dedication, with 7 humble stakes, with a ransacked temple, that we continue to remember until this day. And there's something very beautiful about that, because that's the type of dedication that Jews have shown throughout Jewish history. You know, it's interesting that Rashi, at the beginning of Parshat Vayeshev, says a fascinating phrase. It says, Bikesh Yaakov Leishev B'Shava Katz Alav Rogzol Shel Yosef. That Jacob wanted to live with tranquility, But then all of a sudden, all of the difficulties relating to his sons and Joseph jumped upon him. And there are various interpretations of what Rashi means. But I think that Rashi certainly is offering an apt description of Jewish history. Every time we seem to look for tranquility, everything becomes upended. Things get turned upside down. All of a sudden somebody is shooting missiles, or somebody's beginning a crusade, or somebody is chasing us out of one town and we're going into another. Yet throughout that history, although we haven't had a lot of grandeur, we haven't been able to point to particular buildings and particular temples, we've been able to remain great. And that's why Hanukkah remains a holiday even after the very temple that was dedicated by it disappears. For 2,000 years we don't have a temple, and yet we continue to celebrate Hanukkah because this Hanukkah, this dedication of the Chashmonayim, of the Maccabees, is a dedication that relates to the greatness of the person dedicating, not to the grandeur of the building being dedicated. And that is an enduring Hanukkah. You know, what's interesting is that this past weekend we had a wonderful bar mitzvah. We had the bar mitzvah of Andrew Miller. Andrew, I explained to him what his parents have been doing for the past 13 years, which is an idea that in Judaism we call it chinuch, which is training. Now, what's fascinating is that there are two different ways of translating the word of chinuch, as the Encyclopedia Talmudit notes. One which is given by Rashi, that the word chinuch means initiation, and another which is given by Maimonides, that the word chinuch means training. Now, initiation seems to imply that you're trying to expose a young child into the beauty of the mitzvot. And that is part of what chinuch is. You want to show them, here's the mitzvah of Shabbat, here's the mitzvah of the holidays, here's the mitzvah of kashrut. There's so many different mitzvot, so many different commandments, and you want to show them the beauty of the mitzvah. And that's true. That's a large part of chinuch. But I would say lion's share of chinuch, the lion's share of raising a child properly, is to train them, to train their character. It's hadracha. It's not just about the beauty and the grandeur of the mitzvot that one has been connected to, but it is also about the greatness of the person who is doing the mitzvot. And every time we train a child, we train them to be a Jew. Yes, we want to show them how beautiful the Torah is and how beautiful the mitzvot are, but we do want to teach him the lessons of greatness, the lessons of the Maccabees. And that is the most critical element of chinuch. And that ultimately is the lesson of Hanukkah. Now, the lesson of Hanukkah, as I mentioned, has endured throughout the generations. I've seen it multiple times. I've unfortunately had to officiate at funerals of Holocaust survivors. And the family, in order to find the proper Hebrew names so that we can do the proper prayers at the funeral, they'll bring in the couple's ketubah, the person who passed away, the ketubah that they shared with their spouse. And we'll take a look at the ketubah, and I remembered once or twice seeing a handwritten ketubah, not an artist's calligraphy ketubah, but a ketubah that was written in a ballpoint pen on a plain piece of paper, written out by some rabbi who married a couple a few months after the war was over, and where the couple decided that they were going to continue to rebuild the Jewish people. That's the spirit of Hanukkah. You know, there's a beautiful story told by Yafa Eliach in her book Hasidic Tales of the Holocaust, where she spent a great deal of time interviewing a variety of survivors who came from Hasidic backgrounds about what it was like to continue with their faith during the war. And one of the most powerful tales that's told in this particular book is told by the Blushever Rebbe. The Blushever Rebbe, when he was interred, I believe it was in Bergen-Belsen. So one evening, the evening of Hanukkah, they approached him and they said, one inmate was able to find a button, another inmate was able to put aside a little bit of margarine, a third inmate was able to take a little bit of thread from his uniform, and a fourth one found a match. They had everything it takes to light a Hanukkah lech, a Hanukkah candle, maybe for a little bit of time, but they had everything it takes. And they invited the Rebbe to come one night in the barracks, come that night, the first night of Hanukkah, into the barracks, and light the Hanukkah menorah. And of course, everyone knew that if they were caught, they would be risking their lives. But even so, dozens of Jews came to watch the Bluzheva Rebbe light the Hanukkah candle. And so he begins with the blessings. He makes the first blessing, L'hadlik ner shel Hanukkah, the blessing on the commandment to light the candle of Hanukkah. He makes the second blessing, Sha'ana asla nisim lavotenu, that he did miracles for our ancestors in this time. And then he hesitates. And only after a bit of hesitation and looking around does he continue with the third blessing, Shehachiyanu v'kimanu v'yanu lazman hazeh, that you've kept us alive and brought us unto this day. And after he lit this Hanukkah candle of sorts, and after it burnt out, one of the Bluzheva Rebbe's friends, actually he was a Bundist, he was a secular person, he was not an observant Jew, but he was a learned Jew. And he turns to the Rebbe and he says, Rebbe, I understand. You want to light the Hanukkah menorah, that's a beautiful thing, I supported that. You want to make the blessings of the menorah to God, I can understand that as well. But he says, Rebbe, how do you make a She'achiyanu in Bergen-Belsen? How do you say, thank you God for having allowed me to live until this time? And the Rebbe responded, he said, actually, that's precisely why I hesitated before making that blessing. But then I looked around the room, and I saw dozens of Jews willing to risk their lives just to watch the lighting of the Hanukkah menorah. And I realized then that even though this is a horrible place, and these are horrible times, it was a powerful and inspirational moment to see Jews so devoted to the mitzvah of Hanukkah. And I believe that that is precisely what Hanukkah is all about. What Hanukkah is all about is not about grandeur. It's not about having exceptional, beautiful buildings. It's about greatness. It's about the greatness of those who held their faith in good times and in bad. And may this Hanukkah be a time where all of us are able to achieve greatness, and a time of blessing for all of the Jewish people.